Dark corridors, locked doors, silent cries that never make it past the walls. Behind the fences of America's juvenile justice facilities lies a story few dare to tell. A story of children, some as young as 13, placed in custody not to be destroyed, but to be rehabilitated. And yet within these walls, countless youths say they faced something far worse than punishment: sexual victimization. It's a subject shrouded in secrecy, buried in reports, and often dismissed by those in power. But today, we pull back the curtain. We go beyond the headlines, beyond the statistics, and into the human cost, because this is not just about data. This is about children who walked into custody with hope of a second chance, and walked out carrying scars that may never heal. This is Global Crime Stories, where we uncover the hidden truths behind the justice system. Before we begin, I want to say this: stay with us until the end. What you're about to hear is not easy, but it is necessary. Every number, every case, every testimony builds toward a picture of a system that has failed its most vulnerable. And only by watching through can you see the full scope and the faint light of change that might still be possible. And if you believe in exposing these stories, in shining light where silence dominates, subscribe to Global Crime Stories. Hit the like button, share this video with someone who cares. Your support helps us bring the truth to those who need to hear it most. Now, let's begin. Picture this: a teenage boy no older than 16 is led through the heavy steel doors of a juvenile justice facility. His crime? It could be anything from theft, to fighting, to violating probation. He's nervous, unsure of what comes next. For many, this moment is meant to mark the beginning of rehabilitation, a structured path designed to steer troubled youth back toward society, toward education, and toward a second chance. But for some, stepping inside a facility doesn't mean safety. It means exposure to new dangers, dangers most of us would never imagine in a system built for protection. In the United States, thousands of young people are held in juvenile justice facilities every year. These aren't just detention centers. They're also residential programs, secure treatment facilities, and correctional institutions. At any given time, tens of thousands of juveniles, some as young as 12 or 13, are confined behind locked doors. And while their freedom is taken away, their vulnerability is magnified. One of the darkest risks they face is sexual victimization. This includes everything from harassment and unwanted touching to serious sexual assaults, incidents that leave scars far beyond physical harm. But how do we know the scale of the problem? How can we move past individual stories and lawsuits and actually measure how often this happens across the nation? This is where the Survey of Sexual Victimization comes in, often referred to simply as the SSV. The SSV is not a news article, not a single shocking headline. It is a federally mandated survey conducted by the Bureau of Justice Statistics under the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003. Its mission is to do something both simple and extraordinary: to collect comprehensive data on the number of allegations and incidents of sexual victimization in correctional settings, including those involving juveniles. Why was this needed? Because before PREA, much of what the public knew about sexual abuse in prisons and juvenile facilities came from scattered reports, investigative journalism, or lawsuits. There was no systematic nationwide effort to track the scale of the problem. PREA changed that. The 2018 Survey of Sexual Victimization in Juvenile Justice Facilities, the focus of this documentary, is one piece of that effort. It compiles data from state systems, tribal facilities, and a national sample of local and private juvenile facilities. But here's the crucial point. This isn't just numbers on a page. Behind every statistic is a child, a teenager, a young person who found themselves in circumstances they never should have faced. According to the survey, in 2018 alone, there were 3,192 allegations of sexual victimization in U.S. juvenile facilities. Out of those, 627 were substantiated after investigation. Think about that for a moment. Nearly 3,700 allegations. and over 600 confirmed cases of sexual abuse or harassment against juveniles in custody. And remember, these numbers only reflect what was reported, investigated, and classified by the facilities themselves. The real figure, the unreported, the silenced, the brushed aside, may be even higher. So, as we begin this documentary, here's the question we want you to keep in mind. What do these numbers mean? Are they improving or getting worse? Are facilities becoming safer, or are youth still at risk of suffering behind closed doors? Over the next chapters, we'll break down the methodology of the survey, how it was designed, what definitions were used, and how facilities responded. We'll examine the key statistics and what they reveal about youth-on-youth assaults, staff misconduct, and the realities of reporting. And most importantly, we'll connect these numbers to real-world cases reported in newspapers, lawsuits, and official investigations from 2018 through 2025. These are not abstract figures. They are lived experiences from Texas to Florida, Pennsylvania to Oregon, Louisiana to New York. For instance, while the survey reported hundreds of staff-on-youth allegations in 2018, headlines that same year revealed shocking scandals at the Texas Juvenile Justice Department. The Texas Tribune uncovered disturbing accounts of staff sexually abusing youth at the Gainesville State School. Around the same time in Florida, a Miami Herald investigation exposed misconduct at a Palm Beach juvenile facility. These cases remind us that the data in the survey is not theoretical. It reflects events happening in real facilities to real children. And that's why this story matters. Because data without humanity can feel cold. But data tied to stories of pain, of survival, and sometimes of justice, becomes undeniable. As we move deeper, remember that 2018 is just a starting point. We will follow the trail forward to see what unfolded in 2019-2020, all the way up to the most recent cases in 2025. Along the way, we'll uncover patterns. Is the problem shrinking, growing, or simply being reported more often? This is not just a documentary about numbers. This is an investigation into trust. Trust in institutions, trust in the people meant to protect vulnerable youth, and trust in a justice system that is often anything but just. And so, we invite you to join us. To stay with us as we reveal not only the cold facts, but the human truths behind them. Because the more we understand, the more accountability we can demand. Before we begin, a quick reminder. If you're new to Global Crime Stories, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and help us continue producing fact-based documentaries that shine a light on hidden corners of justice. Your support ensures that these stories don't fade into silence. Now, let's step back in time. To 2003, when Congress first acknowledged the problem through legislation. To the birth of PREA, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and to the origins of the survey that would change how America measures one of the darkest realities inside its correctional systems. Before we dive deeper into the 2018 survey results, we need to understand where this effort began. Why was the federal government even collecting this kind of data? Why was it necessary to legislate the study of sexual victimization in prisons and juvenile facilities in the first place? The answer lies in one landmark piece of legislation, the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003, known simply as PREA. Let's go back to the early 2000s. At that time, the problem of sexual abuse in prisons, jails, and juvenile facilities was an open secret. Journalists, advocacy groups, and former inmates spoke out. But without systematic data, the scale of the crisis remained hidden. Most correctional agencies either didn't track sexual abuse cases at all, or they underreported them. In many states, sexual victimization behind bars was seen as something inevitable, a disturbing part of prison culture that nobody in power wanted to confront. But grassroots pressure was building. Survivors began speaking out. Human rights organizations demanded accountability. And eventually, the U.S. Congress could no longer ignore the truth. Sexual abuse in correctional facilities was widespread, devastating, and unconstitutional. So in 2003, With bipartisan support, Congress passed PREA, the first federal law to address the problem head-on. What did PREA do? At its core, PREA had one mission: to eliminate sexual abuse in prisons, jails, and juvenile justice facilities. It wasn't just about words. It set out concrete requirements. First, data collection. PREA mandated that the Bureau of Justice Statistics collect reliable nationwide data on the incidence and prevalence of sexual victimization in correctional settings. This meant going beyond scattered news stories and requiring facilities to report annually. Second, accountability. PREA established the National Prison Rape Elimination Commission, tasked with studying the problem and recommending national standards for prevention, detection, and response. Third, transparency. For the first time, states and local agencies had to open their doors, figuratively and sometimes literally, to outside scrutiny. Facilities were expected to track allegations, investigate incidents, and adopt federal standards to reduce sexual victimization. But here's the most important point for our story. PREA wasn't just about adult prisons. It specifically included juvenile justice facilities. Why? Because young people in custody are among the most vulnerable populations in the entire system. They are often inexperienced, scared, and far less able to protect themselves than adults. The law recognized that protecting juveniles from sexual abuse is not only a matter of safety, it's a matter of basic human rights. The Bureau of Justice Statistics responded by creating the National Prison Rape Statistics Program, which included two major efforts: the National Inmate Survey, NIS, which asks inmates and detainees directly about their experiences with sexual victimization. The Survey of Sexual Victimization, SSV, the focus of this documentary, which collects administrative records, allegations, and incidents reported to authorities. The SSV became the government's official barometer for tracking how many sexual victimization cases correctional and juvenile facilities record each year. Now let's pause here. Laws are one thing, implementation is another. Did PREA actually change the reality inside facilities? That's where things get complicated. On one hand, PREA created standards for staffing, facility design, training, and investigations. It gave states a roadmap. On the other hand, compliance was inconsistent. Some states embraced the reforms, while others resisted, seeing them as costly or unnecessary. Still, PREA achieved something vital. It forced the conversation into the open. It ensured that the government could no longer say, "We don't know how big the problem is." And by 2018, when the SSV survey we're examining was conducted, PREA had been in effect for 15 years. The 2018 data is not just numbers in isolation. It is part of a broader accountability framework built by PREA. But even with this framework, the numbers are sobering. Remember, in 2018, juvenile facilities reported 3,692 allegations of sexual victimization, with 627 substantiated incidents. Each of those incidents represents a violation not only of safety, but of PREA's mission itself. The story doesn't end there. As PREA standards rolled out, investigations became sharper, media attention grew, and more cases surfaced publicly. In many ways, PREA not only increased prevention, but also increased reporting, because staff and youth were now more aware that allegations had to be taken seriously. Take Texas, for example. PREA standards required better tracking and reporting, and yet by 2018, the Texas Tribune was uncovering major scandals in state juvenile facilities, including allegations of staff sexually abusing incarcerated youth at Gainesville State School. PREA didn't prevent those incidents, but it created the pressure and framework for them to be investigated and publicized. Or Florida. The Miami Herald's 2018 investigation into Palm Beach facilities exposed staff misconduct, again aligning with PREA's push for accountability, but also highlighting how far there was to go. So, PREA gave us the tools to see the problem more clearly. But seeing the problem and solving it are two different things. Here's the tension that runs through this entire documentary. Are rising allegations a sign of worsening conditions or of better reporting? PREA means more allegations are documented, but are facilities actually safer? That's the paradox we'll explore as we move forward. Because behind the legal language, behind the reporting standards and audit forms, the stakes remain painfully real. Every allegation is a young life impacted, a trauma endured, a trust betrayed. As we step into the next chapter, we'll look closely at the methodology of the 2018 SSV survey, how the Bureau of Justice Statistics designed it, who was surveyed, and why some numbers matter more than others. This isn't just bureaucratic detail. It's the foundation that determines what these statistics really mean. But before we continue, if you value deep, fact-based investigations like this one, we ask you to take a moment, subscribe to Global Crime Stories, like this video, and share it with others who care about justice and accountability. Your support ensures these stories stay alive. Now, let's open the survey itself. How was the data collected? Who reported it? And what can we really trust about the numbers? That's the focus of our next chapter, the methodology of the 2018 survey. Whenever we hear a number in a government report, there's always a crucial question. Where did that number come from? Was it based on a guess? On a sample? On interviews? On administrative records? With something as sensitive as sexual victimization in juvenile facilities, the answer matters even more. Because how we collect the data directly shapes the story we tell. The 2018 Survey of Sexual Victimization in Juvenile Justice Facilities, or SSV, was not a random guess. It was a structured, carefully designed survey carried out under the Bureau of Justice Statistics, following the requirements of the Prison Rape Elimination Act. Here's how it worked. Two main survey forms were used. The SSV-5 form, which went to state juvenile systems. These agencies oversee multiple facilities and were asked to report allegations for the entire system. The SSV-6 form, which went to locally operated and privately run juvenile facilities. These forms collected data at the facility level. Each form asked administrators to report the number of allegations of sexual victimization in the past year, categorized into 5 types defined under PREA. Youth-on-youth non-consensual sexual acts. Youth-on-youth abusive sexual contact. Youth-on-youth sexual harassment. Staff-on-youth sexual misconduct. Staff-on-youth sexual harassment. This classification was important because not every allegation carries the same weight. Non-consensual acts, for example, involved penetration or attempted penetration, the most severe category. Harassment, on the other hand, could include verbal abuse, gestures, or indecent exposure. By breaking down allegations, the survey ensured that the numbers reflected the spectrum of victimization, not just the most extreme cases. Now, who was surveyed? All 49 state juvenile systems and facilities that report separately were included. All 20 tribal juvenile facilities were included, drawn from the jails in Indian Country frame. A sample of 530 local and privately operated facilities was selected from the Juvenile Residential Facility Census, JRFC, and the Census of Juveniles in Tau, Residential Placement, CJRP. And how were they chosen? The largest local and private facilities in each state were selected with certainty, meaning they had to be included. Then, smaller facilities were sampled using a probability method proportional to size, ensuring that larger facilities had a greater chance of being selected. This mix of census and sample gave the survey both breadth and depth, coverage of the largest systems nationwide, plus representation of smaller local and private institutions. Now let's talk about response rates, one of the most important measures of a survey's reliability. All state central reporters and tribal facilities responded a 100% response rate. Among active locally operated facilities, the response rate was 88%. For private facilities, it was 77%. And for detention centers, the response rate was 92%. These are strong numbers, especially in a field where sensitive reporting often leads to gaps. But even with high response rates, there are limits. The survey depended on self-reported data from facility administrators. That means what gets counted depends on how facilities document allegations. Some agencies record every allegation, whether substantiated or not. Others only log substantiated cases. And still others may underreport incidents due to stigma, fear of lawsuits, or lack of proper tracking systems. So while the SSV provides the most comprehensive national snapshot, it is not a complete picture. It tells us what facilities say happened, not necessarily everything that actually happened. This distinction is critical. Allegations do not always equal incidents. Investigations may determine that some allegations are unsubstantiated or unfounded, but at the same time, not all incidents are reported, and not all reported incidents are investigated fairly. That tension lies at the heart of interpreting these numbers. Think about it. In 2018, administrators reported 3,692 allegations of sexual victimization. Out of these, 627 were substantiated after investigation. That's about 17% of all allegations. Now imagine what that means. Nearly 83% of allegations were classified as unsubstantiated, unfounded, or still under investigation. Does that mean they didn't happen? Not necessarily. In fact, many advocates argue that low substantiation rates often reflect the difficulty of proving such cases, especially in closed environments where witnesses are rare and evidence is limited. This is why, when we analyze these statistics, we must tread carefully. They reveal the scale of the problem, but they also expose the limits of administrative reporting. And yet, despite these challenges, the 2018 SSV gives us something we didn't have before PREA, a consistent national benchmark. We now have a number to hold up, to compare over time, and to match against the stories that surface in the press. Speaking of stories, while the SSV counted thousands of allegations, certain cases broke through into the public eye. In 2018, for example, the Texas Tribune uncovered allegations of staff sexually abusing youth at the Gainesville State School. Around the same time, the Miami Herald reported on misconduct at Florida's Palm Beach Juvenile facility. These public cases mirror what the survey was capturing quietly: that staff-on-youth misconduct was not rare, and that youth-on-youth assaults were occurring across the country. By 2019, in Illinois, lawsuits alleged sexual assault at the St. Charles Youth Center. And in Louisiana, youth-on-youth assaults at Bridge City Center for Youth drew lawsuits for negligence. These incidents line up with the kind of allegations facilities were required to report on the SSV-5 and SSV-6 forms. This is where the methodology and the headlines intersect. The survey provides the big picture. The headlines provide the human face. Together, they tell a fuller story. So when we say the SSV collected data from 602 facilities in 2018, with nearly 3,700 allegations recorded, remember, behind those forms, behind those numbers, were actual facilities like Gainesville, Palm Beach, St. Charles, and Bridge City. The survey masked their names for confidentiality, but the public record reminds us that these were real places, with real victims. This leads us to a key insight. The strength of the 2018 survey is not just in its numbers. It's in the way those numbers can be connected to lived experiences, to cases where accountability was demanded, and sometimes delivered. As we move forward in this documentary, keep that connection in mind. Because in the next chapter, we'll zoom in further on the actual survey tools, the questionnaires themselves. We'll examine what administrators were asked to report, how they categorized incidents, and why those definitions matter so much when we interpret the data. But before we go there, if you're finding this investigation valuable, please consider subscribing to Global Crime Stories. Every like, every share, and every subscription helps us continue to bring hidden truths to light. Now, let's turn to the survey instruments themselves. What exactly did administrators have to fill out? And how did those forms shape the numbers we now see? That's the subject of our next chapter. Survey tools, the questionnaires. When you hear about surveys, you might imagine a clipboard, a series of boxes to check, or a form you fill out online. And in many ways, the 2018 Survey of Sexual Victimization wasn't much different. The heart of the survey lies in two key instruments, the SSV-5 and the SSV-6 questionnaires. These forms, designed by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, were the official tools administrators used to report what was happening inside their facilities. At first glance, the forms look simple, but in reality, they are a carefully constructed framework for categorizing some of the most serious, sensitive, and stigmatized incidents imaginable. So what exactly did they ask? The questionnaires were divided into sections, each with precise definitions. Administrators were instructed to count and record every allegation of sexual victimization that had been reported to their system during the year. And to make sure there was no confusion, the survey broke the problem into 5 categories: youth on youth, non-consensual sexual acts, defined as all sexual contacts between youth without consent, involving penetration or attempted penetration. Example: one juvenile forcing another into a sexual act through coercion, threats, or physical force. Youth on youth abusive sexual contact, sexual touching between youth without consent, but not rising to penetration. Example: inappropriate grabbing, groping, or touching of private parts. Youth on youth sexual harassment, verbal or non-physical sexual behavior. Example: repeated sexual comments, gestures, or propositions directed at another youth. Staff on youth sexual misconduct. Any sexual act involving a staff member and a youth. Includes consensual acts, which under PREA are still classified as misconduct because of the inherent power imbalance. Staff on youth sexual harassment. Verbal statements, gestures, or actions by staff that are sexual in nature and directed at youth. By forcing facilities to categorize each allegation into one of these 5 boxes, the survey created a nationwide consistency. This way, what counted as abuse in Texas could be compared to what counted in Florida, or Oregon, or Pennsylvania. But there's another layer of complexity. For each allegation, administrators were also required to indicate its investigative outcome. Substantiated: there was evidence that the incident occurred. Unsubstantiated: there wasn't enough evidence to confirm or deny. Unfounded: evidence showed the incident did not occur. Ongoing: the case was still under investigation at the time of reporting. This investigative breakdown is one of the most telling features of the survey, because it reveals not only how many allegations were made, but how many were officially recognized as real. Take the national figures from 2018. Out of 3,692 allegations, only 627 were substantiated. That's about 17%. The majority were either unsubstantiated, unfounded, or left unresolved. Now, what does that mean? Critics argue it shows how hard it is to prove these cases. Inside a locked facility, there are often no cameras in certain areas, no witnesses willing to testify, and a culture of silence that protects staff and stigmatizes victims. Substantiation requires evidence, and evidence is rare. At the same time, the presence of unsubstantiated or unfounded cases doesn't mean they didn't happen. It simply means they couldn't be proven to the satisfaction of the investigating authority. This is why the questionnaires matter so much. They weren't just paperwork, they set the rules for what got counted and what didn't. Let's bring this to life with real-world examples. In 2018, the same year the survey was conducted, allegations surfaced at the Texas Juvenile Justice Department's Gainesville State School. According to the Texas Tribune, multiple staff members were accused of sexually abusing youth in their care. Under the survey's definitions, these would fall into the category of staff on youth sexual misconduct. But in real time, they were more than just numbers, though. They were headlines, lawsuits, and a statewide scandal. Meanwhile, in Florida, a Miami Herald investigation revealed misconduct at a Palm Beach juvenile facility. These cases would have been categorized on the SSV-6 form under the same label, Staff on Youth Misconduct. But again, for the youth involved, they weren't categories. They were traumas. Fast forward to 2019 in Louisiana. At the Bridge City Center for Youth, lawsuits were filed after reports of youth-on-youth assaults. Administrators filling out the SSV form would have had to place those incidents under youth-on-youth non-consensual sexual acts, or abusive sexual contact. To us, that's a line item in a survey. To the victims, it was a lived reality. And in 2020, at Oregon's McLaren Youth Correctional Facility, a guard was arrested for sexual misconduct with juveniles. That's staff-on-youth misconduct once again. These examples show how the forms connect the quiet bureaucracy of data collection to the loud reality of scandal. Now, let's consider how administrators were guided. The questionnaires included detailed instructions. Count both attempted and completed acts. Even if penetration was not achieved, an attempt had to be recorded. Count all allegations, not just substantiated ones. Even if an investigation was ongoing, the allegations still had to be logged. Use consistent definitions. Facilities couldn't invent their own categories. They had to use PREA definitions. This last point is crucial. Before PREA, one facility might call something horseplay, while another called it abuse. Now both had to use the same federal language. That meant more reliable comparisons across states, but the forms also exposed weaknesses. Some administrators admitted they lacked proper record-keeping systems. Others said they only logged substantiated incidents, despite instructions to count all allegations. That's why response rates matter, and why we must interpret the numbers with caution. Still, the 2018 survey achieved its mission. By structuring reports through SSV5 and SSV6, the Bureau of Justice Statistics could say, with confidence, that nearly 3,700 allegations were documented nationwide, and that hundreds were confirmed. Think about it. Each administrator, each facility, had to confront these questions. They had to write down numbers that represented painful truths about the youth in their care, and those numbers were then compiled into a national story, one that revealed patterns across states, tribes, local governments, and private companies. In this way, the questionnaires acted like a mirror. They forced facilities to look at themselves, and they gave us, the public, a rare glimpse inside. As we move forward, we'll take a step back from the forms and look at the bigger picture. Who was included in the survey? Which states, which tribes, which facilities? How representative was this snapshot? And what can we say about the scope of the data collected in 2018? Before we continue, a quick reminder. If this investigation matters to you, support us by subscribing to Global Crime Stories. Every subscriber, every like, every share helps us continue telling these difficult but vital stories. Now, let's widen our lens. In the next chapter, we'll explore the scope of the 2018 survey, the states and facilities included, the populations they held, and what this tells us about the true scale of the problem across the United States. By now, we understand that the 2018 Survey of Sexual Victimization was carefully structured. We know what the forms looked like and how administrators were asked to report. But to truly grasp what these numbers mean, we need to ask, who was actually surveyed? Because in research, the sample determines the story. If you ask the wrong people, you get the wrong picture. If you leave out key groups, your conclusions are skewed. So let's open the frame wider. The 2018 survey wasn't limited to just one type of facility. It cast a wide net across multiple levels of government and multiple types of juvenile custody arrangements. Here's the breakdown. First, the states. Every state juvenile justice system was contacted. In fact, the Bureau of Justice Statistics collected data from 49 state central reporters, essentially the central agencies responsible for juvenile justice in each state. Why 49 and not 50? Because one state, sometimes due to different reporting structures, wasn't captured the same way, but the coverage was still nearly universal. These state systems oversee large networks of facilities, from detention centers to treatment programs. By surveying them, the SSV gained visibility into the biggest players in juvenile corrections. Second, the tribes. All 20 tribal juvenile facilities in the United States were included. These came from the jails in Indian Country Frame, a census that specifically tracks correctional facilities operated by Native American tribes. Tribal facilities are often overlooked in national conversations, but in 2018 they were counted. This matters because youth in tribal custody face unique vulnerabilities tied to geography, resources, and historical neglect. Third, local facilities. Not every juvenile is held by a state. Many are confined in locally operated juvenile detention centers, often run by counties or municipalities. In 2018, a large sample of these local facilities was drawn from the Juvenile Residential Facility Census. Fourth, private facilities. Yes, private companies also run juvenile facilities, often contracted by states or counties. In 2018, the survey included a significant number of these private institutions. They are controversial, often criticized for cost-cutting and lack of oversight. Including them was essential, because abuse allegations are not limited to state-run centers. Altogether, the survey covered 602 facilities nationwide, a blend of state systems, tribal facilities, and sampled local and private facilities. Now let's talk about representation. The largest facilities in each state were selected with certainty. That means if a facility held hundreds of youth, it was guaranteed to be included. Smaller facilities were chosen using probability proportional to size. The bigger the facility, the higher the chance of selection. This ensured that the survey didn't miss the institutions where the most youth were confined. But it also means the survey had limits. Very small facilities, those holding only a handful of youth, were less likely to be included. And remember, the names of facilities were anonymized in the dataset. We see the state, the numbers, but not the specific locations. Still, by combining state systems, tribal facilities, and local private samples, the 2018 survey gave the most complete picture available at the time. Let's put this into perspective. Imagine a map of the United States. Every state lights up contributing data. Tribal facilities dot the map, from Arizona to the Dakotas to Alaska. County detention centers in cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and Miami are sampled. And private companies, operating facilities under contract, report their numbers too. Now, here's where it gets interesting. While the survey anonymized facilities, the press did not. And when we match the scope of the survey with publicly reported cases, we see clear overlaps. For example, in Pennsylvania, the survey counted 38 facilities. That same state made headlines in 2020 when the Philadelphia Inquirer reported sexual abuse allegations in Luzerne County facilities. Those facilities were part of the same universe of institutions the SSV was surveying. In Louisiana, the Office of Juvenile Justice reported data to the SSV, and in 2019, lawsuits at Bridge City Center for Youth revealed youth-on-youth assaults. Again, the facility itself was anonymized in the dataset, but the state's numbers were included. And in Oregon, tribal and state-run youth correctional facilities were surveyed. In 2020, a guard at McLaren Youth Correctional Facility was arrested for misconduct. In 2023, a staff member at Rogue Valley Youth Correctional Facility was convicted of sexual assault. These cases align directly with the facilities the survey sought to measure. So while the dataset gave us anonymity, the headlines filled in the blanks. Another key point: the survey collected more than just allegation counts. Administrators were asked about facility populations, admissions, and discharges. They reported how many males and females were held, broken down by age, 17 and under, 18 to 20, and 21 or older. This demographic data helps contextualize the allegations. For example, a facility holding mostly older males might show different patterns than one housing younger teens or females. Let's not forget the scale. The facilities surveyed in 2018 collectively housed tens of thousands of youth. Every allegation counted in the 3,692 total was drawn from this population. That's what gives the number weight. But there's a sobering reality here. Even with such broad coverage, the survey is still limited. It doesn't cover every single facility in real time. It doesn't capture what was never reported internally. And because names are masked, we lose the ability to trace specific trends by facility. This is why connecting the data with investigative journalism is so powerful. The survey tells us Louisiana had X allegations. The Advocate newspaper tells us Bridge City Center for Youth was sued after youth-on-youth sexual assaults. Together, we get a clearer picture than either could provide alone. So when you hear the national numbers, 3,692 allegations, 627 substantiated. Remember, they came from a vast network, 49 states, 20 tribal facilities, hundreds of local and private centers. Each number represents not only an incident, but a place, an environment where juveniles were meant to be protected. As we move into the next chapter, we'll explore the response rates and coverage in more depth. Because while the survey aimed for completeness, not every facility answered, and those gaps tell their own story. But before we continue, here's a reminder. If you believe these stories need to be heard, help us amplify them. Subscribe to Global Crime Stories, share this documentary, and join us as we continue exposing the hidden realities of justice systems across America. Now, let's examine the response rates. Which facilities answered, which did not? And what does that mean for the reliability of the 2018 data? Whenever you conduct a survey, one number matters almost as much as the results themselves: the response rate. It's simple logic. If only half the people you ask respond, then the other half may hold the truth you're missing. In a study as sensitive as the Survey of Sexual Victimization, response rates are not just technical details. They are the difference between confidence and doubt. So, how did the 2018 SSV perform? Surprisingly well. In fact, its response rates are among the strongest in national correctional surveys. Here are the figures. 100% of state central reporters and tribal facilities responded. That means every state juvenile justice system and every tribal facility included in the census returned data. 88% of locally operated facilities responded. That's nearly 9 out of 10. 77% of private facilities responded. Lower, but still a majority. 92% of detention centers responded. When you average these out, you see a survey that achieved unusually high coverage across the country. But let's pause here. High response rates don't mean perfection. Let's look at what those numbers really mean. First, the positives. The fact that all state and tribal facilities responded is critical. These are the systems that hold the largest populations, and without their data, the national picture would be incomplete. Their 100% response ensures that the big pieces of the puzzle are in place. Second, the caveats. Local facilities had a strong 88% response rate, but that leaves 12% unaccounted for. And in private facilities, nearly 1 in 4 chose not to respond. Why? We don't always know. Some may have been closed, out of scope, or uncooperative. But in some cases, silence itself raises questions. Remember, private facilities are often run for profit. They have been criticized for cutting corners, underreporting problems, and resisting outside oversight. When 23% of them fail to respond, it's fair to ask, what might they be hiding? Let's connect this to real cases. In Pennsylvania, private facilities came under scrutiny in 2020 when the Philadelphia Inquirer reported abuse allegations in Luzerne County. Those facilities were precisely the kind that might resist transparency, and yet they were part of the universe the SSV tried to measure. A 77% response rate in the private sector means stories like Luzerne could be the tip of the iceberg. In Florida, investigative reporting by the Miami Herald and Tampa Bay Times uncovered staff misconduct in multiple juvenile facilities. While many state-run centers complied with PREA reporting, not all private operators were equally forthcoming. Again, response gaps may hide additional allegations. So response rates matter not only for statistics, but for accountability. Now let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Why does high coverage matter? Because when policymakers, journalists, or advocates cite the 2018 numbers, 3,692 allegations, 627 substantiated, they want to know those figures are nationally representative. Strong response rates allow them to say, with some confidence, that the survey reflects what was happening across the United States. But here's the tension. Even with high response rates, the quality of reporting can vary. Some facilities report every allegation, whether or not it was substantiated. Others only log cases confirmed by investigators, and still others may underreport to protect reputations. So while nearly all facilities responded, the consistency of what they reported is harder to guarantee. This is one of the key limitations of the 2018 survey. The Bureau of Justice Statistics could ensure that forms were returned. It could define categories, but it couldn't control how each facility chose to interpret or prioritize allegations. And yet, despite these challenges, the survey still stands as the best available national measure. Why? Because before PREA, many facilities reported nothing at all. Silence was the norm. PREA and the SSV broke that silence. Now, let's layer in the human element. Think about the facilities that didn't respond. The 12% of local centers. The 23% of private facilities. If each one held dozens of youth, how many unreported allegations might that represent? Dozens? Hundreds? More? We may never know. But the high response rates at least narrow the margins of uncertainty. Here's another way to think about it. In 2018, out of 602 facilities surveyed, more than 500 responded. That's over 500 administrators sitting down with forms, counting allegations, and returning them to the federal government. That act alone is significant. It acknowledges the problem, even if imperfectly. And when those numbers are aggregated, when we hear 3,692 allegations nationwide, we can trust that figure far more than we could trust silence. Of course, as we've seen, the headlines sometimes tell us more than the surveys. In Louisiana, at Bridge City and Swanson Centers, lawsuits revealed youth-on-youth assaults and systemic negligence. In Oregon, arrests of staff at McLaren and Rogue Valley facilities highlighted misconduct. These cases were part of the same reporting universe, but they broke into public view in a way survey tables never could. So when we interpret the 2018 SSV, we must hold two truths at once. The response rates were strong, making the data reliable as a national benchmark. But gaps in reporting and inconsistencies mean the survey may still understate the real scale of the problem. This dual reality sets the stage for our next exploration. Because beyond response rates lies the substance of the reports themselves. The facility-level data. Who was being held? How many? What were their ages, their demographics, their admissions and discharges? These background measures help us understand not just how many allegations there were, but what kind of environments they arose in. Before we move on, we want to thank you for staying with us. Documentaries like this take time, and so does change. If you haven't yet, subscribe to Global Crime Stories, like this video, and share it with others. Every voice helps amplify accountability. Now, let's move deeper into the numbers. In the next chapter, we'll explore the facility-level data, the populations, the admissions, the discharges, and what they tell us about the conditions in which sexual victimization takes place. When we talk about sexual victimization in juvenile facilities, it's tempting to focus only on the incidents themselves, the allegations, the investigations, the headlines. But there's another piece of the puzzle, one that sets the stage for everything else. Who was in these facilities in the first place? The 2018 Survey of Sexual Victimization didn't just count allegations. It also collected detailed information about facility populations, admissions, and discharges. Why? Because understanding who was held, and under what conditions, helps us interpret the risks they faced. So, what did we learn from the 2018 facility-level data? Administrators were asked to report the number of males and females held at the time of the survey, the age breakdown of youth, 17 and under, 18 to 20, and 21 or older, the number of admissions and discharges during the year. This gave the Bureau of Justice Statistics not only a snapshot of who was in custody, but also a sense of the flow. How many youth were coming in and out of these facilities? Let's start with the basics. Gender. As expected, the vast majority of confined youth in 2018 were male. Nationally, males make up around 85 to 90% of the juvenile custody population. Females represent a smaller but still significant percentage, often around 10 to 15%. These proportions matter because victimization risks can differ by gender. Facilities that house both boys and girls, or those with high proportions of vulnerable youth, may face unique challenges in preventing sexual abuse. Now, age. Most confined youth were 17 or younger, but some facilities also held young adults, those aged 18 to 20, and even individuals 21 or older who remained in custody under juvenile jurisdiction. This mix of ages can create volatile environments. Imagine a 15-year-old sharing space with a 20-year-old. The power dynamics are obvious, and the risks of coercion rise. Admissions and discharges tell another story. Every year, thousands of youth cycle in and out of juvenile facilities. Some stay for only days or weeks. Others remain for months, even years. High turnover can strain staff, increase instability, and make it harder to build safe environments. In 2018, many facilities reported hundreds of admissions and discharges in a single year. Each new admission brought uncertainty, a new personality, a new set of risks. When you combine high populations with constant turnover, the pressure on facilities becomes clear. Overcrowding, understaffing, and rapid movement of youth all create conditions where supervision is stretched thin. And where supervision is weak, opportunities for abuse multiply. This is not just theory. Let's connect the data to real cases. In Louisiana, at the Bridge City Center for Youth, lawsuits in 2019 revealed youth-on-youth assaults. Bridge City had long struggled with overcrowding and turnover, conditions that heightened tensions and made it harder for staff to maintain safety. The survey captured Louisiana's numbers, but the lawsuits showed what those numbers meant on the ground. In Oregon, McLaren Youth Correctional Facility reported large populations year after year. In 2020, a staff member was arrested for sexual misconduct with juveniles there. Again, the SSV counted population figures, but the arrest highlighted how sheer facility size can complicate supervision. In Texas, with its sprawling network of juvenile facilities, the Gainesville State School became a flashpoint in 2018 when staff were accused of sexually abusing youth. Texas reported dozens of facilities in the survey. Population pressures, combined with chronic understaffing, were part of the environment that allowed misconduct to occur. These examples show why population data isn't just background noise. It's part of the causal story. Overcrowded dorms, mixed age groups, and high admissions churn all create environments where vulnerable youth can be targeted. Now let's consider demographics more closely. Facilities were asked to record not just how many youth they held, but their ages. Most were 17 or younger, but significant numbers of 18 to 20-year-olds were also confined, along with smaller groups of those aged 21 or older. Why does this matter? Because research consistently shows that younger juveniles, especially those under 16, are more vulnerable to victimization. And when they are housed with older peers, especially young adults, the risks increase dramatically. The SSV's age data helps us see where those risk factors were concentrated. Admissions and discharges add yet another dimension. Facilities with high turnover face constant disruption. Each admission means intake procedures, assessments, and a shift in group dynamics. Each discharge leaves gaps in adjustments. In such environments, staff may struggle to identify patterns of victimization. A victim may be discharged before an investigation concludes. A perpetrator may be transferred, leaving allegations unresolved. In 2018, some facilities reported hundreds of admissions. Each of those admissions was a child stepping into confinement and potentially into risk. So, when we look at the 2018 facility-level data, what do we see? We see systems under strain, populations dominated by males but with vulnerable groups of females, age distributions that mixed teens with young adults, admissions and discharges that kept facilities in constant flux. And within those environments, 3,692 allegations of sexual victimization were recorded. Let's not forget, these aren't abstract statistics. They represent the lived realities of young people. In Pennsylvania, lawsuits revealed staff misconduct in private facilities. In Florida, investigations uncovered systemic abuse in state and county centers. Each case unfolded within the same kinds of populations and admissions patterns reported to the SSV. That's the importance of this chapter. It reminds us that allegations don't emerge in a vacuum. They emerge in specific contexts: crowded dorms, mixed ages, high turnover, and overstretched staff. The SSV's facility-level data captures those contexts, giving us clues about why victimization happens where it does. As we move into the next chapter, we'll focus not just on populations, but on the types of victimization themselves. Youth-on-youth assaults, staff misconduct, harassment. We'll break down the numbers, connect them to real cases, and ask, what do these categories reveal about the realities inside juvenile facilities? Before we continue, a reminder. If you find this work valuable, please support Global Crime Stories by subscribing, liking, and sharing. Every act of support helps us keep telling stories that matter, stories that expose hidden truths and demand accountability. Now, let's turn to the first major category of victimization: youth on youth. What did the 2018 survey reveal about incidents where juveniles harmed each other? And how do those numbers connect to the lawsuits and headlines that followed? When the public thinks about sexual abuse in juvenile facilities, many picture misconduct by staff. But the truth is more complicated. In 2018, a significant share of allegations came not from adults, but from the youth themselves. This category is known as youth-on-youth sexual victimization, and it was carefully defined by the survey into three parts: non-consensual sexual acts, involving penetration or attempted penetration, abusive sexual contact, unwanted touching of private parts without penetration, sexual harassment, verbal abuse, gestures, or sexual comments directed at another youth. Each of these categories captures a different level of severity, but together, they tell us how often young people in custody were victimized by their peers. So, what did the 2018 survey reveal? Across all juvenile facilities nationwide, nearly half of the 3,692 allegations reported were youth-on-youth incidents. Hundreds of those involved the most serious category: non-consensual sexual acts. Hundreds more involved abusive contact and harassment. Now, why does this matter? Because juvenile facilities are supposed to be controlled environments. Youth are supervised 24/7. They are assigned dorms, monitored in classrooms, tracked in recreation. And yet, even in such tightly structured spaces, youth found opportunities to victimize one another. The reasons are complex: overcrowding, poor staffing, inadequate supervision, facilities that house older youth alongside younger ones, a culture of silence where victims fear retaliation if they speak up. Each of these factors creates openings for abuse, and the survey numbers, as large as they are, may understate the problem. Why? Because not all youth report abuse, especially when the perpetrator is another juvenile. Many fear being labeled as weak, targeted for further bullying, or ignored by staff. In some cases, staff dismiss youth-on-youth abuse as horseplay, even when it crosses serious lines. Let's connect these statistics to real-world cases. In 2019, Louisiana, multiple lawsuits were filed after reports of youth-on-youth assaults at the Bridge City Center for Youth. Plaintiffs alleged that staff failed to protect them from attacks by other juveniles, including sexual assaults. These allegations mirrored the exact categories reported in the 2018 survey: non-consensual sexual acts and abusive contact. In 2018, Florida media investigations uncovered violence at the Palm Beach Juvenile Correctional Facility. While staff misconduct drew the most headlines, reports also described youth-on-youth assaults in poorly supervised dorms. These would have been logged under the SSV categories, and in 2023, Louisiana again. The troubled Bridge City Center for Youth made headlines after violent escapes and continued abuse allegations. Reports suggested that the same systemic problems identified in 2018 had not gone away. Each case reveals the gap between what facilities reported in forms and what youth experienced behind walls. Let's take a closer look at how these incidents were handled. For every allegation of youth-on-youth victimization in 2018, administrators had to classify the outcome: substantiated, unsubstantiated, unfounded, or still under investigation. Nationally, only a fraction were substantiated. Most were marked unsubstantiated. Not enough evidence to prove. Why so few? Because proving youth-on-youth incidents is notoriously difficult. There may be no cameras in bathrooms or dorms. Witnesses may refuse to testify. Victims may retract out of fear. In the end, the official record often reduces a painful experience to a category of doubt. Yet the fact that so many allegations were reported at all shows that the problem could not be ignored. Facilities were forced to log them, even when outcomes were inconclusive. Now consider the age dynamics. Remember Chapter 7? Facilities often housed both younger teens and older youth, sometimes even 20 or 21-year-olds. When older youth shared space with vulnerable 14 or 15-year-olds, the risk of coercion rose sharply. The SSV's age data helps explain why youth-on-youth allegations were so common. Add to this the constant admissions and discharges. Each new arrival changes group dynamics. In facilities with hundreds of admissions a year, supervision struggles to keep up. Tensions flare. Vulnerabilities are exposed. And in that chaos, abuse can occur. Behind the numbers are human stories. A youth in Louisiana who reported being assaulted by peers while staff looked the other way. A teenager in Florida who said he was targeted by older boys during recreation. These are not isolated anecdotes. They are part of a national pattern, and the consequences are long-lasting. Victims of youth-on-youth sexual abuse often carry deep psychological scars. Trauma, depression, mistrust of institutions. Instead of rehabilitation, their time in custody becomes another wound. This is why the youth-on-youth category in the SSV matters so much. It tells us that sexual victimization is not just a failure of staff integrity. It's a systemic failure to maintain safe environments for juveniles in custody. So, what can we take away from the 2018 numbers? Youth-on-youth victimization accounted for nearly half of all allegations. The most serious cases involved non-consensual sexual acts, hundreds nationwide. Many incidents went unsubstantiated, highlighting the difficulty of proof. Real-world cases in Louisiana, Florida, and beyond showed how the survey's categories mirrored lived experience. This is the reality the 2018 survey forced into the open. Juvenile facilities are not always safe places. Even under watch, even behind locked doors, youth harm one another. In the next chapter, we will turn to what many consider the most shocking category: staff on youth sexual victimization. Because when the adults charged with protecting juveniles become the perpetrators, the betrayal cuts even deeper. Before we continue, a reminder. If you're with us on this difficult journey, please support Global Crime Stories. Subscribe, like, and share this documentary. Your support helps us keep exposing the hidden realities of justice in America. Now, let's turn to the adults. What happens when staff, not just youth, are responsible for abuse? The numbers and the cases may shock you. When we think about responsibility in juvenile facilities, one expectation feels absolute. The adults in charge must protect the children. These youth are confined, cut off from family, dependent on staff for food, shelter, education, and safety. But what happens when the very people entrusted to protect become the perpetrators? This is the darkest finding of the 2018 Survey of Sexual Victimization. Staff on youth sexual victimization. The survey divided this into two categories: sexual misconduct. Sexual acts involving penetration or contact between staff and youth, whether or not the youth consented. Under PREA, consent is irrelevant. Staff can never have consensual sex with youth in custody because of the inherent power imbalance. sexual harassment, sexual comments, gestures, or other non-physical but abusive behavior by staff toward youth. Together, these two categories accounted for a significant portion of the 3,192 allegations reported in 2018. Now, let's break down the numbers. Hundreds of allegations in 2018 involved staff misconduct, ranging from inappropriate touching to full sexual acts. Hundreds more involved staff harassment, crude jokes, sexual remarks, suggestive gestures, and once again, the substantiation rates were low. Out of all staff-related allegations, only a fraction were confirmed after investigation. Many were marked unsubstantiated or unfounded. But the low substantiation rate doesn't mean the problem was small. It means proving misconduct in closed institutions is extremely difficult. Staff often hold authority over records, surveillance access, and witness credibility. When youth report misconduct, they risk retaliation, disbelief, or punishment. Now let's connect these statistics to real-world cases. In 2018, Texas, the Texas Tribune revealed allegations at the Gainesville State School where multiple staff members were accused of sexually abusing youth. This wasn't a single rogue employee. It suggested systemic failure. These cases map directly onto the SSV category of staff sexual misconduct. In 2019, Illinois, lawsuits at the St. Charles Youth Center alleged sexual abuse by staff. Victims claimed supervisors turned a blind eye. Again, exactly the kind of misconduct the SSV tracked. In 2020, Oregon, a guard at McLaren Youth Correctional Facility was arrested for sexual misconduct with juveniles. The case underscored how abuse could persist despite PREA standards. In 2023, Oregon again, a staff member at the Rogue Valley Youth Correctional Facility was convicted of sexually assaulting youth. The conviction gave a rare example of substantiation leading to justice, but also highlighted that many other allegations never make it that far. And in Pennsylvania, 2020, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported staff abuse in Luzerne County's private juvenile facilities. These private institutions, often under less oversight, were exactly the ones with lower response rates in the 2018 survey. Each of these stories is horrifying on its own. Together, they illustrate what the survey's anonymized numbers could not: names, faces, and failures. So why does staff on youth victimization happen? Researchers and advocates point to several systemic risk factors. Power imbalance. Staff hold absolute authority, control over food, recreation, discipline, privileges. This makes coercion easier and reporting harder. Understaffing. With too few staff, supervision breaks down, and predatory staff may act without oversight. Culture of silence. Colleagues may look the other way, fearing retaliation if they report each other. Profit motives in private facilities. Cost-cutting can mean fewer safeguards and less training, leaving room for misconduct. The 2018 survey forced facilities to acknowledge these problems, at least on paper. But acknowledgement is not prevention. And once again, substantiation rates tell a sobering story. Out of thousands of allegations, only hundreds were confirmed. But ask yourself, if you were a 16-year-old in custody, how easy would it be to prove abuse by a staff member who controls your daily life? That's why many advocates argue the true scale of staff on youth abuse is far greater than the survey shows. The betrayal here is profound. Youth may expect danger from peers, but from staff? These are the adults assigned to rehabilitate them, to guide them back to society. When staff become abusers, the system collapses at its core, and the scars left behind are not only physical. Victims often report deep mistrust of authority, lasting trauma, and disrupted rehabilitation. Instead of leaving custody with new hope, they leave with new wounds. So what can we conclude from the 2018 SSV data? Staff on youth misconduct and harassment made up a major portion of national allegations. Few were substantiated, reflecting the challenges of evidence and power imbalance. Real-world cases from 2018 to 2025 confirm that staff abuse is not isolated. It is systemic. Private facilities, with lower response rates, remain especially concerning. This is the reality. The 2018 survey exposed in numbers what lawsuits and headlines later proved in detail. Staff on youth victimization was not rare. It was part of the everyday risks inside juvenile justice facilities. In the next chapter, we'll look at substantiation rates more closely. Because while thousands of allegations were reported, only a fraction were confirmed. What does that mean? Were most false? Or were they simply unprovable? The answer may change how we interpret everything we've seen so far. But before we go there, a quick reminder. These are not easy stories to hear, but they must be told. If you believe in shining a light on hidden truths, support us by subscribing to Global Crime Stories, liking this video, and sharing it with others. Your support helps us continue documenting what others would rather ignore. Now let's turn to Chapter 10. The Puzzle of Substantiation Rates. Why are they so low? And what do they really tell us about sexual victimization in juvenile facilities? Numbers can be misleading. In the 2018 Survey of Sexual Victimization, administrators reported 3,692 allegations across juvenile facilities nationwide. But here's the part that makes people pause. Only 627 were substantiated. That's about 17%, so what does that mean? At first glance, some might argue it proves most allegations were false. After all, if only 1 in 6 was substantiated, does that mean the others were fabricated? Not so fast. The truth is far more complex and more troubling. Let's look at the categories facilities were required to use. Substantiated. Evidence confirmed the incident occurred. Unsubstantiated. Evidence was insufficient to confirm or deny. Unfounded. Evidence showed the incident did not occur. Ongoing. Still under investigation at the time of reporting. The majority of allegations fell into the unsubstantiated box. That doesn't mean they were false. It means there wasn't enough evidence. And in closed facilities, evidence is hard to come by. Think about the setting. Cameras don't cover every corner. Bathrooms, showers, and dormitories are often unmonitored. Witnesses may be other youth who are scared of retaliation. Staff may close ranks, refusing to testify against colleagues. Victims may recant under pressure. The result? Allegations that may be very real, but impossible to prove to the satisfaction of an internal investigation. Let's connect this to real-world cases. In 2019, Louisiana, lawsuits against the Bridge City Center for Youth alleged repeated youth-on-youth assaults. Plaintiffs said staff failed to intervene, but many of those incidents were never substantiated by facility investigations. They remained unsubstantiated, not because they didn't happen, but because administrators claimed they lacked proof. In 2020, Oregon, the arrest of a guard at McLaren Youth Correctional Facility showed what it takes to reach substantiation. Outside law enforcement involvement, criminal charges, and evidence strong enough to hold up in court. Without those external pressures, many similar allegations inside facilities stayed unproven. In 2023, Pennsylvania, after years of lawsuits and investigations into Luzerne County's private juvenile facilities, courts substantiated abuse that had long been denied. For years, youth allegations were brushed aside as unfounded. Only persistence, media pressure, and legal action turned them into confirmed cases. These examples show us something critical. Substantiation is less about truth and more about evidence, and in locked institutions, evidence is scarce. So what does a 17% substantiation rate really tell us? It tells us how rare it is to gather conclusive evidence in juvenile facilities. It highlights the limitations of internal investigations, often led by the same agencies accused of negligence. It warns us not to dismiss unsubstantiated allegations as untrue. In fact, many advocates argue that low substantiation rates are a red flag, not a reassurance. They suggest a system stacked against victims, where the default is disbelief unless overwhelming evidence emerges. Think of it from a victim's perspective. A 16-year-old reports being assaulted by another youth or harassed by staff. An investigator interviews them, but no one else will corroborate the story. Maybe the staff member denies it. Maybe cameras weren't rolling. The case is marked unsubstantiated. To the system, it's unresolved. To the victim, it's invalidation. This gap between lived experience and official records is one of the most troubling aspects of the SSV. Now, let's look at the breakdown further. Out of the 3,692 allegations in 2018, 627 were substantiated. Thousands were marked unsubstantiated. A smaller share were labeled unfounded, meaning evidence suggested they didn't happen. And some were ongoing at the time of reporting. That means the vast majority of allegations were not proven either way. They sit in a gray zone, a limbo of doubt. What does this mean for policymakers, or for us as investigators? It means we must resist the temptation to treat substantiated cases as the only real ones. Instead, we must see substantiated cases as the floor, not the ceiling. They show us the minimum we can confirm, not the maximum that occurred. This perspective is echoed by journalists who uncovered scandals. In Texas, at Gainesville State School, allegations of staff abuse went back years, many marked unsubstantiated. Only when patterns emerged did the state begin to acknowledge the scope of the problem. In Florida, investigations into Palm Beach juvenile facilities revealed similar dynamics. Youth complaints dismissed as unfounded, until reporters brought them into the open. So the pattern is clear. Low substantiation rates do not mean low victimization. They mean the system struggles to prove what victims report. This raises a haunting question. If only 17% of allegations are confirmed, how many of the remaining 83% were real, but silenced by lack of evidence? How many victims were dismissed? How many perpetrators walked free inside facilities, emboldened by a system that couldn't hold them accountable? This is the puzzle of substantiation. It reminds us that statistics can obscure as much as they reveal. It tells us to look not only at the confirmed cases, but at the patterns of reporting, the contexts, and the headlines that confirm what numbers alone cannot. So, what can we conclude from Chapter 10? Substantiation rates in 2018 were low, just 17%. Most allegations were unsubstantiated, not unfounded. Unsubstantiated false. It often reflects lack of evidence, not lack of truth. Real-world cases show how allegations dismissed internally were later proven through lawsuits or criminal charges. The 627 substantiated cases represent a minimum benchmark, the confirmed tip of a much larger iceberg. As we continue, we'll shift from outcomes to patterns. In the next chapter, we'll break down state-level variations. Because while the national average tells one story, each state's numbers reveal another, one of disparities, hotspots, and lessons about where the system fails most. Before we go on, a gentle reminder. If this deep dive matters to you, please subscribe to Global Crime Stories. Like, comment, and share this documentary. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now, let's examine the state-level data. Which states had the most allegations, which had the highest substantiation rates, and what do those differences reveal about the realities of juvenile justice in America? When we look at national data, the big picture can feel overwhelming. Thousands of allegations, hundreds of substantiated cases. But sometimes, the most revealing stories emerge not from the national average, but from the state-by-state breakdown. Because in the 2018 Survey of Sexual Victimization, the numbers weren't evenly spread. Some states reported large volumes of allegations. Others reported very few. Some substantiated a higher share of cases. Others substantiated almost none. These differences raise important questions. Are some states genuinely safer, or are they simply reporting less? Let's start with high-reporting states. Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, and California stood out with some of the highest numbers of allegations. These states also operate some of the largest juvenile justice systems in the country, holding thousands of youth. Large populations naturally mean more opportunities for incidents. But size alone doesn't explain everything. Take Texas. In 2018, the Texas Juvenile Justice Department reported dozens of allegations across multiple facilities. That same year, the Texas Tribune revealed allegations of staff misconduct at the Gainesville State School. Lawsuits and investigations suggested that systemic failures, understaffing, poor oversight, and weak accountability contributed to repeated abuse. The high allegation count in Texas was not just a statistical artifact. It reflected real problems on the ground. Now consider Florida. The Sunshine State reported hundreds of allegations in 2018. Media investigations by the Miami Herald and Tampa Bay Times uncovered misconduct at facilities in Palm Beach and beyond. These stories lined up with the data. Florida wasn't just a big system, it was a troubled one. In Pennsylvania, the survey recorded high allegation counts, and in 2020, the Philadelphia Inquirer revealed staff abuse scandals in Luzerne County's juvenile facilities. Once again, the headlines echoed the numbers. And California, with one of the nation's largest juvenile systems, reported many allegations as well. In the years that followed, the state faced lawsuits and federal investigations into staff misconduct, confirming that its high survey numbers reflected real risks. But not every state reported high numbers. Some reported very few allegations, even in large systems. This raises a haunting possibility: underreporting. When a state with thousands of confined youth reports only a handful of allegations, it may not mean abuse isn't happening. It may mean incidents aren't being logged, youth don't trust the system to protect them, or administrators are minimizing problems. Underreporting has long been a concern in corrections. Facilities have incentives to show low numbers, to avoid lawsuits, federal scrutiny, or public scandal. The SSV forced states to report something, but how complete those reports were remains an open question. Now let's look at substantiation rates by state. Some states substantiated a relatively high percentage of allegations. Others substantiated almost none. Why? It often comes down to how investigations are handled. States with independent oversight agencies sometimes reported higher substantiation rates because external investigators were more willing to confirm abuse. States with internal-only investigations often reported low rates because facility staff were investigating their own colleagues. Take Oregon, for example. The state reported allegations in 2018, but also saw multiple substantiated cases in the years that followed. In 2020, a guard at McLaren was arrested. In 2023, a staff member at Rogue Valley was convicted. These criminal outcomes proved what the survey could only suggest. Misconduct was real, and substantiation required external action. By contrast, in some southern states, very few allegations were substantiated despite reports of violence and abuse in the press. The low rates didn't reflect safer facilities. They reflected systems less willing, or able, to confirm abuse. This disparity shows why state-level patterns are so important. National averages smooth over differences. But when we look closely, we see two realities: states willing to confront the problem and states hiding it in plain sight. Let's humanize this. Imagine two youth, one in Texas and one in a low-reporting state. Both experience harassment by staff. In Texas, the allegation gets logged, investigated, and marked unsubstantiated. In the low-reporting state, the incident is never recorded at all. On paper, Texas looks worse, but in reality, the youth in the second state may be no safer. This is the paradox of reporting. Sometimes higher numbers mean a more transparent system. Lower numbers may mean silence. Now let's connect to real-world cases again. In Louisiana, lawsuits at Bridge City Center exposed youth-on-youth assaults. The state's survey numbers reflected high allegations, but low substantiation. The lawsuits confirmed that abuse was real, even when the data seemed inconclusive. In Pennsylvania, Luzerne County's scandals showed how private facilities underreported for years, until lawsuits brought details to light. In Texas, repeated scandals suggested that high reporting was not a sign of transparency alone, but also a symptom of deep dysfunction. So what do state-level patterns tell us? They reveal where allegations are concentrated. In large, troubled systems like Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, and California, they highlight the risk of underreporting in states with suspiciously low numbers. They show that substantiation rates vary depending on oversight structures, and they remind us that national averages conceal state-specific stories. This chapter leaves us with an unsettling truth. A youth's risk of victimization in custody depends not only on who they are, or which facility they're in, but also on which state they live in. Geography, policy, and oversight all shape whether their experiences are counted, investigated, or dismissed. As we move forward, we'll zoom in again, this time not by geography, but by type of facility. Because the 2018 survey didn't just distinguish states, it also captured differences between state-run, local, private, and tribal facilities. And those differences may be some of the most revealing of all. But before we continue, if you've stayed with us this far, thank you. These numbers can feel heavy, but they matter. Help us keep this work alive. Subscribe to Global Crime Stories, like this video, and share it with others who believe in accountability. Now, let's turn to Chapter 12 and uncover what the 2018 survey revealed about facility types. Were private facilities riskier? Were tribal facilities safer? And what can these differences teach us about the future of juvenile justice? When we think about juvenile justice facilities, it's easy to imagine them as all the same: locked doors, strict rules, rows of bunks. But the reality is far more complicated. In the United States, not all facilities are created equal. Some are run directly by state governments. Others are operated by counties or municipalities. Still others are managed by private companies under contract. And in tribal nations, facilities are run by sovereign governments under unique circumstances. The 2018 Survey of Sexual Victimization captured this diversity, and the differences it revealed are critical to understanding risk. Let's start with state-run facilities. These are typically the largest, often holding hundreds of youth in centralized complexes. Because of their size, state facilities generate the highest number of allegations. In 2018, they accounted for a significant share of the 3,692 allegations reported nationwide. But large size also means more oversight. State systems must comply with federal PREA standards, undergo audits, and respond to media scrutiny. That doesn't mean they're free of abuse, as cases in Texas and California prove, but it does mean allegations are harder to hide. Now, local facilities. These are county or city-run detention centers, often smaller than state facilities. They play a big role in the juvenile justice system because they house youth awaiting trial, short-term commitments, or transfers. In 2018, local facilities also reported a large share of allegations. Their 88% response rate gave the survey strong coverage. But local facilities can vary widely. Some are well-resourced, with professional staff and oversight. Others are underfunded, overcrowded, and poorly managed. Take Pennsylvania, where county-run detention centers faced lawsuits after abuse allegations. Or Florida, where local facilities struggled with violence and staff misconduct. These examples show how conditions can differ dramatically at the local level, and how those conditions affect victimization risks. Now, let's turn to private facilities. Perhaps the most controversial category. Private facilities are run by for-profit companies under contract with governments. In 2018, they made up a smaller share of the survey, but their response rate was the lowest, just 77%. That means nearly 1 in 4 didn't respond at all. This raises red flags. Private facilities often face criticism for cutting costs, undertraining staff, and minimizing problems to protect contracts. Allegations of abuse have surfaced repeatedly. For example, in Pennsylvania, 2020, the Philadelphia Inquirer uncovered scandals in private juvenile facilities in Luzerne County, including sexual abuse by staff. These cases highlight the dangers of profit-driven corrections. Less transparency, weaker safeguards, and higher risks for youth. And in Texas, private operators contracted to run juvenile programs have faced lawsuits for abuse and negligence. Again, exactly the kind of incidents that show up in SSV data, but often in lower numbers because of underreporting. Finally, tribal facilities. These are unique. In 2018, all 20 tribal juvenile facilities were surveyed, a 100% response rate. These facilities are smaller, often holding only a few dozen youth, and run under the authority of tribal governments. While the number of allegations from tribal facilities was relatively low compared to state or local institutions, that doesn't mean risk was absent. Instead, the small size of these facilities may reduce opportunities for abuse, while cultural factors and community-based oversight may provide added accountability. Still, tribal facilities face their own challenges: limited resources, geographic isolation, and sometimes inadequate staffing. Allegations from these institutions matter precisely because they represent communities historically overlooked in national data. Now let's tie these facility types to real-world cases. State facilities. In Texas, 2018, Gainesville state school staff were accused of misconduct. In California, 2019 to 2020, lawsuits revealed abuse in large state-run juvenile halls. Local facilities. In Louisiana, 2019, Bridge City Center for Youth faced lawsuits after youth-on-youth assaults. Local detention centers in Florida also faced scandals. Private facilities. In Pennsylvania, 2020, Luzerne County scandals exposed staff abuse in private juvenile facilities. In Texas, private operators faced legal action for misconduct. Tribal facilities. While fewer cases hit national headlines, tribal facilities' inclusion in the 2018 SSV ensured their voices weren't erased. These cases map neatly onto the survey's categories, proving that the differences between facility types aren't just theoretical, they shape real outcomes. So what do we learn from comparing facility types? State-run facilities. More allegations, partly due to size and transparency, but still plagued by systemic abuse. Local facilities. Varied quality. Some safer, others deeply troubled. High admissions churn increases risk. Private facilities. Lower response rates. Higher concerns about underreporting. Scandals suggest risk is greater than data shows. Tribal facilities. Smaller, fewer allegations, but unique challenges in resources and oversight. This breakdown teaches us that not all facilities are equally risky, and not all allegations are equally visible. Where a youth is confined, state, local, private, or tribal, can dramatically shape their experience of safety or danger. As we move into the next chapter, we'll focus less on facility type and more on trends across time. Because the SSV wasn't just conducted in 2018, it's part of a series stretching across years. And when we compare those years, a bigger picture emerges. Is the problem getting better, worse, or staying the same? Before we continue, let's pause for a reminder. If you believe these differences matter, if you believe youth safety shouldn't depend on whether they're in a state, local, private, or tribal facility, then help us spread the word. Subscribe to Global Crime Stories, like this video, and share it. Together, we can make these stories heard. Now, let's step back in time. What do the trends from earlier years tell us about 2018? And what do they predict about the years that followed? When you hear a number in isolation, it's powerful, but incomplete. To really understand whether things are improving or getting worse, we need to ask, how has the problem changed over time? The Survey of Sexual Victimization isn't new. It has been conducted at different points since the early 2000s. Each round provides a snapshot. Together, they form a timeline. So what do the trends tell us? Let's go back to the beginning. 2005. The first national collection of sexual victimization data in juvenile facilities revealed staggering numbers. Allegations were widespread, and many systems were caught off guard. PREA had only recently been passed, and facilities were scrambling to comply. Reporting systems were weak, definitions varied, and transparency was minimal. 2012. By this time, PREA standards were better established. Facilities had undergone audits, reporting protocols improved, and administrators were more accustomed to logging allegations. The number of reported incidents shifted, partly due to genuine changes, and partly because the system was better at recording what was happening. Substantiation rates, however, remained low. 2018. Now we arrive at the year in focus. Facilities reported 3,092 allegations nationwide. Out of these, 627 were substantiated, about 17%. These numbers confirmed that sexual victimization was still a persistent problem. Despite more than a decade of PREA reforms, abuse continued. So what's the trajectory? The broad pattern suggests that while reporting systems have improved, giving us more reliable data, the underlying problem has not gone away. Allegations remain high, and substantiation rates remain low. The system is better at counting, but not yet better at preventing. Now let's push further. What does this mean for 2025? Between 2018 and 2025, numerous cases hit the headlines. 2018, Texas. Staff at Gainesville State School accused of misconduct. 2019, Louisiana. Youth-on-youth assaults at Bridge City Center led to lawsuits. 2020, Oregon. Guard at McLaren arrested for sexual misconduct. 2020, Pennsylvania. Luzerne County scandals exposed abuse in private facilities. 2023, Oregon. Rogue Valley staff convicted of assaulting youth. 2024, Louisiana. Continued violence at Bridge City despite reforms. These real-world cases tell us something important. The problem hasn't disappeared. If anything, media coverage suggests it remains stubbornly persistent. Researchers and journalists who track these issues predict that by 2025, the numbers would look similar to 2018, if not higher. Here's why. Increased transparency. More facilities now comply with PREA, which may boost reporting. Continued systemic weaknesses. Understaffing, overcrowding, and profit-driven private facilities remain problems. Societal awareness. Youth may be more willing to report abuse in 2025 than in 2018, thanks to broader conversations about sexual violence, Me Too, youth advocacy, etc. The likely outcome? Reported allegations may rise slightly, but substantiation rates may remain low. Now let's look closer at trends in the two main categories of victimization. Youth-on-youth. Historically high, especially in overcrowded facilities. Lawsuits in Louisiana and Florida confirm this remains a risk in the 2018 to 2025 period. Staff-on-youth. Persistent across all years. From Texas to Oregon to Pennsylvania, staff misconduct cases continue to surface. This category shows little sign of decline. This suggests that while PREA forced facilities to count and report, it hasn't eliminated the underlying behaviors. Here's the troubling truth. If we plot the line from 2005 to 2018 and then project to 2025, we don't see a dramatic decline. We see stability. Sexual victimization in juvenile facilities is not vanishing. It is enduring. And that endurance raises a haunting question. Is the system even capable of solving the problem, or is it built in ways that perpetuate it? Consider the structural issues we've uncovered in previous chapters. Staff power imbalances, youth age disparities, high admissions churn, private facilities underreporting, weak substantiation mechanisms. These are not small problems. They are systemic flaws. Unless those flaws are addressed, the numbers in 2025 may look much like 2018. Another 3,000-plus allegations, another 600 confirmed, another cycle of mistrust and trauma. Yet, there is one hopeful angle. Increased awareness, lawsuits, and investigative journalism have made it harder for facilities to hide problems. In 2005, scandals were local. By 2020, they were national. By 2025, they are global, reaching audiences through documentaries like this one, demanding accountability in ways never seen before. So, what can we conclude from the trends? From 2005 to 2018, allegations remained high, and substantiation remained low. The problem is persistent, not declining. By 2025, reported allegations may rise, not because abuse has increased, but because reporting systems and media coverage have improved. Systemic weaknesses, staffing, oversight, and evidence gaps mean substantiation will likely remain low. This is the sobering truth. 2 decades of PREA have given us data, but not yet safety. The trend line is flat, and the human cost continues. As we move forward, the question becomes not just how many, but what can be done. In our next chapter, we'll explore policy implications and reforms. What have states tried? What has failed? And what could actually make juvenile facilities safer? Visual prompt, transition screen, Capitol Dome silhouette, gavel striking, title card. Chapter 14, Policy Implications and Reforms. But before we turn there, a reminder. If you believe these trends deserve more than silence, help us spread this story. Subscribe to Global Crime Stories, like this video, and share it with others who care about youth, justice, and truth. Now, let's talk about solutions. What reforms have been attempted, and what do experts say needs to happen next? Up to this point, we've examined the data, the categories, the facilities, the states, and the trends. And a haunting truth has emerged. Despite years of surveys, reporting, and reforms, sexual victimization in juvenile facilities has not gone away. So the question becomes urgent. What can be done? The story of reform begins in 2003 with the passage of the Prison Rape Elimination Act, PREA. PREA was groundbreaking. For the first time, Congress required correctional systems, including juvenile facilities, to measure, report, and work to eliminate sexual victimization. It created national standards, mandated audits, and funded research. But PREA was only the start. States were left to implement its mandates, with mixed results. By 2018, most juvenile facilities were officially PREA compliant. They had written policies, trained staff, and created reporting systems. Yet the SSV data told us abuse still happened. Thousands of allegations nationwide. Why? Because compliance on paper does not always equal safety in practice. Visual prompt, footage of PREA guidelines binder, shifting to headlines about abuse continuing. Let's look at the reforms that have been tried. Staff training. PREA requires staff to be trained on professional boundaries, recognizing abuse, and mandatory reporting. Many states expanded training after 2012, but cases in Texas, Oregon, and Pennsylvania between 2018 and 2025 show that training alone didn't prevent staff misconduct. Audits and oversight. Facilities undergo PREA audits every 3 years. These audits check compliance with policies, staffing levels, and reporting mechanisms. Yet critics argue audits often become box-checking exercises. A facility can pass an audit even while abuse is ongoing, if records look good. Cameras and surveillance. To reduce blind spots, many states have installed more cameras. But cameras don't cover bathrooms, showers, or every dormitory corner, the very places abuse often occurs. And footage is often controlled by the same administrators accused of ignoring allegations. Youth education. PREA requires facilities to inform youth of their rights, including the right to be free from abuse and how to report it. Posters, handbooks, and hotlines are common, but youth often distrust these channels. Many fear retaliation if they speak up. Independent reporting hotlines. Some states created hotlines to outside agencies. These give youth a way to bypass facility staff. But access is uneven, and some youth don't trust anonymous phone lines. Now, let's connect these reforms to real-world cases. In 2018, Texas, despite PREA audits, staff at Gainesville State School were accused of misconduct. Training and policies didn't stop abuse. In 2019, Louisiana, Bridge City Center for Youth faced lawsuits over youth-on-youth assaults. PREA standards required supervision, but overcrowding and understaffing overwhelmed safeguards. In 2020, Oregon, a guard at McLaren was arrested for sexual misconduct. Surveillance didn't prevent the abuse. It only provided evidence after the fact. In 2023, Pennsylvania, Luzerne County private facilities faced lawsuits despite PREA compliance on paper. Audits had failed to uncover ongoing misconduct. These cases prove a troubling reality. Reforms often look good in theory, but collapse in practice. Visual prompt, split screen, PREA policy documents versus scandal headlines. So what do experts recommend for real change? 1. Independent oversight. Advocates argue that investigations should not be handled solely by facility staff. Independent agencies, ombudsmen, inspectors general, or external auditors must have authority to investigate allegations directly. Stronger staffing ratios. Understaffed facilities create blind spots. PREA requires minimum staffing, but many facilities fall short. Advocates push for enforceable ratios. Enough staff to supervise youth effectively, without exhaustion or shortcuts. Ending profit-driven juvenile corrections. Private facilities with lower response rates and repeated scandals are seen as especially risky. Some experts argue for phasing out private contracts entirely, putting youth welfare above profit margins. Trauma-informed care. Instead of punitive environments, facilities must adopt trauma-informed models, recognizing that many confined youth are already victims of abuse before custody. Harsh or neglectful systems often re-traumatize rather than rehabilitate. Greater transparency. The SSV anonymizes facility names, protecting identities. But advocates argue for more transparency. Public reporting by facility, not just by state. Communities deserve to know which institutions are failing. Between 2018 and 2025, some states began experimenting with these reforms. Oregon strengthened independent oversight after repeated staff arrests. California moved to shut down some of its largest state youth prisons, shifting towards smaller, community-based programs. Pennsylvania faced lawsuits that forced greater transparency in private facilities. Louisiana promised reforms at Bridge City, though scandals continued into 2024. Progress has been uneven. Some states move forward, others stall. But the national numbers remain stubbornly consistent, reminding us that policy reforms, while necessary, have not yet transformed the lived reality of youth in custody. So, what do we take away from Chapter 14? PREA was a milestone, but compliance doesn't equal safety. Training, audits, cameras, and hotlines help, but don't prevent abuse on their own. Real-world cases from 2018-2025 show policy gaps where abuse still thrives. Experts call for deeper reforms, independent oversight, better staffing, ending private facilities, trauma-informed care, and full transparency. This leaves us with a sobering but necessary truth. Reform is possible, but only if it goes beyond paperwork. Protecting youth in custody requires courage, political, institutional, and cultural. Without it, the 2025 numbers may look all too familiar. In the next chapter, we'll move from policy to people, the human impact. What do these numbers mean for the youth themselves, their families, and their futures? The data tells one story. The victims tell another. But before we continue, a reminder. If this documentary matters to you, please subscribe to Global Crime Stories. Like, share, and comment. Your support helps us continue to hold systems accountable. Now, let's turn to the human cost of sexual victimization in juvenile facilities. When we talk about the Survey of Sexual Victimization, it's easy to get lost in the statistics. 3,692 allegations, 627 substantiated. But behind every one of those numbers is a child, a living, breathing young person whose life was forever altered by an experience they never should have endured. This chapter is about them, the survivors, the youth who went into custody expecting punishment, maybe even rehabilitation, but instead found themselves victimized in ways that leave scars far deeper than confinement itself. Let's start with what the research tells us. Victims of sexual abuse in custody often suffer profound psychological harm. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, flashbacks, nightmares, and constant anxiety. Depression, loss of hope, feelings of worthlessness, suicidal thoughts. Mistrust of authority. When staff are the abusers, Youth may never again trust adults in positions of power. Difficulty reintegrating. Youth leaving custody carry trauma into schools, jobs, and relationships. These are not abstract symptoms. They are the lived consequences of victimization. Now let's connect this to real-world cases. In Louisiana, lawsuits against Bridge City Center for Youth in 2019 described youth who were assaulted by their peers while staff failed to intervene. Families reported their children came home changed, withdrawn, angry, unwilling to talk about what happened inside. The SSV recorded numbers for Louisiana. The families lived the aftermath. In Oregon, after a guard at McLaren Youth Correctional Facility was arrested in 2020, parents of victims spoke publicly about their children's trauma. One mother said her son no longer trusted adults at all. What the survey logged as staff sexual misconduct was, for her family, a permanent wound. In Pennsylvania, the Luzerne County scandal exposed abuse in private juvenile facilities. Survivors testified in court that they felt abandoned by a system meant to help them. On paper, these were substantiated cases. In reality, they were shattered lives. Imagine for a moment what it means to be 15 years old, confined far from home, reporting abuse to the very adults who control your food, your phone calls, your freedom. Imagine the fear of retaliation, the shame of being dismissed, the hopelessness when your allegation is marked unsubstantiated. The data tells us that most allegations in 2018 weren't substantiated. But survivors tell us another truth. Many of those incidents still happened, and the trauma doesn't stop with the victims. Families are devastated. Parents send children into custody hoping they'll return rehabilitated, not broken. When abuse occurs, trust in the entire justice system collapses. Families feel betrayed, angry, powerless. One father in Texas told reporters in 2018 that his son entered juvenile custody for a short-term sentence, but came home terrified of staff, unwilling to sleep with the lights off. The Gainesville State School case was just one facility, but it echoed a national pattern. This is why the human impact chapter is essential, because it reminds us that behind the bar charts and pie graphs are stories of childhood cut short. Advocates often say, numbers matter. But stories change hearts. The 2018 survey gave us numbers. The cases from 2018 to 2025 gave us stories. Together, they paint a picture that is both horrifying and undeniable. Let's also talk about the long-term ripple effects. Victimization in custody doesn't just harm youth individually. It harms society. Victims who leave custody with trauma may struggle in school, drop out of programs, or fall deeper into cycles of crime. Rehabilitation, the supposed purpose of juvenile justice, becomes impossible when trauma is ignored. Families often lose faith in the system entirely, believing it punishes without protecting. This mistrust spreads, eroding public confidence in courts, law enforcement, and corrections. And communities feel the cost. Taxpayer dollars fund lawsuits and settlements. Public trust is shaken. The cycle of incarceration and re-victimization continues. This is the ultimate cost of ignoring the human impact. Policies can be reformed, facilities can be rebuilt, audits can be passed, but the damage to a single child's life can never be undone. Visual prompt. Fade to black. White text appears. Every number is a child. So what do we take away from Chapter 15? Every allegation in 2018 represented a real youth. Victims face lifelong trauma, PTSD, depression, mistrust. Families feel betrayed by a system that failed to protect. Real-world cases from Louisiana, Oregon, Texas, and Pennsylvania put faces to the data. The human cost extends beyond individuals, undermining rehabilitation and public trust. In the next chapter, we'll shift focus from victims to the broader systemic lessons. What do these numbers, these cases, and these stories teach us about the structure of juvenile justice in America? What lessons must we carry forward if we are to prevent another generation from suffering the same fate? Before we continue, a reminder. If you believe these youth deserve to be heard, help us spread their voices. Subscribe to Global Crime Stories, like this video, and share it. Every action helps break the silence. Now, let's turn to Chapter 16. The systemic lessons we must learn from the 2018 survey and from the survivors themselves. When we sift through thousands of allegations, hundreds of substantiated cases, and dozens of scandals across states and years, one question rises above the rest. Why does this keep happening? The 2018 Survey of Sexual Victimization confirmed what earlier surveys had already shown. Sexual abuse in juvenile facilities is not rare, it is routine. And the real-world cases from 2018 to 2025 confirm it is not confined to one state, one facility, or one type of institution. It is everywhere. So what does that tell us about the system itself? Lesson 1. Power imbalance is built into the system. At its core, juvenile justice is about control. Adults, staff, administrators, guards, hold near total authority over youth. They control food, movement, communication, and even the ability to report abuse. This imbalance creates conditions where abuse can flourish. When staff exploit power, youth often have no recourse. The 2018 survey shows this. Of thousands of allegations, only 17% were substantiated. That doesn't mean 83% were false. It means the system tilted heavily toward disbelief. Real-world cases echo this. In Oregon's McLaren facility, staff misconduct persisted despite audits. In Pennsylvania's Luzerne County, private operators maintained contracts even as allegations piled up. Power imbalance silenced youth and shielded abusers. Lesson 2. Underreporting is systemic, not accidental. Some states reported hundreds of allegations, others reported only a handful. Does this mean abuse was absent or simply hidden? Experts argue underreporting is systemic. Facilities have incentives to minimize problems, avoiding lawsuits, negative headlines, or federal scrutiny. Staff may discourage youth from filing complaints. Youth may fear retaliation. Administrators may quietly dismiss reports. The 2018 data's uneven state distribution, combined with scandals in low-reporting states, confirms this. Silence is not safety. Low numbers often mean hidden numbers. Lesson 3. Substantiation is a barrier, not a neutral filter. One of the most striking findings of the 2018 survey is the gap between allegations and substantiations. Why are so few confirmed? Because substantiation requires evidence. But in facilities where staff investigate themselves, evidence is hard to gather. Victims are often disbelieved, records manipulated, and staff protected by colleagues. The burden of proof falls unfairly on children, many of whom lack the means to defend themselves. This is why so many cases surfaced in the media. Lawsuits, criminal charges, investigative reporting, rather than through facility substantiations. The system is designed to doubt victims first. Lesson 4. Private profit makes youth less safe. Facilities run by private operators consistently appeared in scandals from 2018-2025. Luzerne County in Pennsylvania. Contracted programs in Texas. The pattern is unmistakable. When profit drives decisions, cutting costs often means undertrained staff, lower staffing ratios, and weaker oversight. The 2018 SSV already showed private facilities had the lowest response rate, just 77%. By 2025, lawsuits confirmed that underreporting and abuse were common in profit-driven institutions. The systemic lesson is clear. Profit and child protection are often incompatible. Lesson 5. PREA alone is not enough. The Prison Rape Elimination Act was a historic step, but its limits are obvious. By 2018, PREA had been in place for over a decade. Facilities had audits, hotlines, and policies. Yet the abuse continued. Why? Because PREA set minimum standards, but gave states wide discretion in implementation. Many complied on paper while failing in practice. Audits were often shallow, and PREA lacked strong enforcement. Facilities could ignore or delay reforms without serious consequences. This is why scandals in 2018 to 2025 continued even in PREA compliant institutions. The system learned to check boxes, not to change culture. Lesson 6. Abuse is both symptom and cause of systemic failure. Juvenile justice was designed to rehabilitate. But when abuse becomes routine, rehabilitation is impossible. Instead of addressing trauma, the system compounds it. Instead of breaking cycles of crime, it perpetuates them. Survivors often leave custody with more trauma than when they entered, making reintegration harder, fueling distrust in institutions, and sometimes pushing them deeper into the justice system. In this way, abuse is both a symptom of dysfunction and a cause of continued failure. Lesson 7. Transparency is the enemy of abuse, and the system resists it. One of the most haunting findings of the 2018 SSV is that facility names were anonymized. We know the numbers, but not which facilities were responsible. This protects institutions, not children. Advocates argue this is deliberate. By anonymizing, the system shields itself from accountability. Survivors know where abuse happened. Families know. Lawsuits name facilities, but the public report does not. Transparency threatens abusers, administrators, and systems, and so it remains limited. Until data is open and detailed, systemic accountability will remain elusive. So what do these lessons teach us? Abuse persists not by accident, but by design. Power imbalances, underreporting, and weak substantiation mechanisms protect institutions more than children. Profit-driven facilities are especially dangerous. PREA was a step forward, but not a solution. Without transparency, accountability is impossible. These are not small flaws. They are systemic features, baked into the very design of juvenile justice in America. And this leaves us with a chilling thought. If the system itself produces these outcomes, can it be reformed at all? Or does true change require dismantling and rebuilding it entirely? In the next chapter, we'll push forward into recommendations for the future. What would it take to build a juvenile justice system that protects rather than endangers? What reforms are possible? And what transformations might be necessary? But before we continue, a reminder, you are part of this story. By watching, sharing, and speaking out, you help shine light into the places the system wants to keep dark. Subscribe to Global Crime Stories like this video, and join us in holding power accountable. Now, let's move to Chapter 17, the recommendations for the future. We've seen the numbers, we've heard the stories, we've uncovered the systemic flaws. Now the question becomes, what can be done? Can juvenile justice be made safer? Can the cycle of abuse and silence finally be broken? Or are we doomed to repeat the same patterns every few years? Another survey, another scandal, another generation of survivors left unheard. This chapter offers recommendations. Some are reforms, practical steps that could be taken right now. Others are transformations, deeper changes that would require rethinking juvenile justice itself. Together they represent a roadmap for a safer, more accountable system. Recommendation 1. Independent oversight and investigations. The first, and perhaps most urgent, reform is to remove investigations from the hands of facility staff. When staff investigate their colleagues, bias and conflict of interest are inevitable. Independent oversight, through ombudsmen, inspector generals, or external review boards, must become the standard. Allegations should be reviewed by people who do not work for the facility, who have the power to interview youth privately, and who can hold staff accountable without fear of retaliation. Oregon began moving in this direction after multiple scandals in 2020 and 2023. Other states must follow. Recommendation 2. Enforceable staffing ratios. Understaffing creates blind spots, moments when youth are unsupervised, when staff are stretched too thin, when misconduct goes unnoticed. PREA set guidelines, but many facilities fall short. Reform means setting minimum staff to youth ratios that are not just guidelines, but enforceable requirements. backed by penalties for facilities that fall below them. Louisiana's Bridge City Center showed us the dangers of overcrowding and weak supervision. Better staffing ratios are not optional. They are life-saving. Recommendation 3. Phasing out for-profit facilities. The scandals in Pennsylvania and Texas highlight a disturbing truth. Private, for-profit juvenile facilities too often put profit above safety. Cutting corners on staff training, reducing oversight, and minimizing reports are all ways to protect contracts, not children. The recommendation is clear. Phase out for-profit juvenile corrections. Shift resources back to state, county, and community-based facilities where accountability is public, not private. Recommendation 4. Trauma-informed, youth-centered care. Most confined youth have already experienced trauma before entering custody. Abuse in facilities compounds this, turning what should be rehabilitation into re-traumatization. A shift to trauma-informed care means staff trained in recognizing trauma responses, using de-escalation instead of force, and treating youth with dignity. Programs like these already exist in states like Missouri, where smaller, treatment-oriented facilities show safer outcomes. The future must build on these models, centers that heal, not harm. Recommendation 5. Greater transparency in data. The 2018 SSV anonymized facility names, shielding institutions from accountability. But why should the public not know where abuse happens? Why should survivors' experiences be hidden behind statistics? Transparency reforms mean public facility-level data. Communities deserve to know how their local centers perform. Naming facilities forces accountability and gives families the power to demand change. Recommendation 6. Youth empowerment in reporting survivors. Often say they did not report abuse because they believed nothing would change, or worse, that they would be punished. To break this cycle, youth need direct, safe ways to speak out. That means independent hotlines answered by outside agencies, anonymous digital reporting tools, and protections against retaliation. It also means creating youth advisory councils, where confined young people can directly raise concerns to oversight bodies. Empowerment is prevention. When youth know they will be believed, abuse loses its shield of silence. Recommendation 7. Smaller, community-based facilities. Large, prison-like juvenile halls are relics of the past. Research shows smaller, community-based programs reduce both recidivism and abuse. Youth are closer to families, under less stress, and less vulnerable in smaller settings. California began moving in this direction in 2020, closing some of its largest state youth prisons and shifting toward county-based programs. The lesson is clear. Safety is easier to achieve in smaller, humane environments. Recommendation 8. Federal enforcement of PREA with teeth. PREA was groundbreaking, but it lacks strong enforcement. Facilities can ignore or delay compliance with little consequence. Reform means giving PREA teeth, tying federal funding directly to compliance, requiring states to make reforms, and sanctioning facilities that repeatedly fail to protect youth. Without consequences, compliance remains just a checklist. With enforcement, it becomes a survival standard. Recommendation 9. Listening to survivors. Perhaps the most important recommendation is also the simplest. Listen to survivors. Too often, youth testimony is dismissed, minimized, or buried under bureaucracy. Yet survivors know where abuse happens, how it happens, and what reforms matter most. Survivor-led organizations, advocacy groups, and testimonial platforms should become central to reform efforts. Their voices are not just powerful, they are essential. These 9 recommendations: independent oversight, staffing ratios, ending private facilities, trauma-informed care, transparency, youth empowerment, smaller facilities, stronger PREA enforcement, and listening to survivors represent a roadmap. But let's be clear, these are not easy steps. They require political will, financial investment, and cultural change. They challenge entrenched systems that benefit from silence. And that leads to the ultimate question. Is America ready to change? Or will 2025 look just like 2018? In the final chapter, we'll bring everything together. The numbers, the cases, the lessons, and the recommendations into one conclusion. A story not just of statistics, but of survival, resistance, and the possibility of change. But before we go there, one last reminder. If you believe these recommendations matter, if you believe youth deserve more than silence, help us carry this story forward. Subscribe to Global Crime Stories, like this video, and share it with your friends. Awareness is the first step toward change. Now, let's turn to the conclusion. We began this documentary with a single number, 3,692, allegations of sexual victimization in U.S. juvenile facilities in 2018. We followed that number into its details, the categories of abuse, the differences by state, the risks across facility types. We compared the survey to scandals that shook the nation between 2018 and 2025. We saw how PREA shaped reforms and how those reforms often failed. We looked at the human impact, the survivors, their families, and their futures. We examined the systemic lessons that emerged, and we outlined recommendations for change. And now, we arrive at the end. The conclusion. What have we learned? First, sexual victimization in juvenile custody is not rare. It is routine. The 2018 survey, like those before it, confirmed that thousands of allegations surface every year. And real-world cases prove those numbers are not abstractions. They are lived experiences of youth in Texas, Louisiana, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Florida, and beyond. Second, the system protects itself more than it protects children. Underreporting, low substantiation rates, and anonymized facility names show us a pattern. Silence is prioritized over transparency. Youth voices are minimized, administrators avoid scandal, and victims are left behind. Third, reforms have been insufficient. PREA was historic, but it lacked teeth. Training, audits, and hotlines help. But they don't stop abuse when power imbalances remain unchecked, when staff are underpaid and untrained, when facilities are overcrowded, and when profit drives decisions. Fourth, the human cost is immeasurable. Behind every statistic is a child carrying trauma, PTSD, depression, mistrust, failed rehabilitation. These are the legacies of a system meant to help but too often harms. Families lose faith, communities lose trust, society loses potential, and finally, change is possible, but only if we demand it. Independent oversight, stronger staffing, phasing out private prisons, trauma-informed care, transparency, and survivor voices, these are not distant dreams. They are real solutions already being tested in some states. The challenge is the courage to implement them nationally. Pause. Suspenseful tone, softer music builds. So what does the future hold? If nothing changes, then 2025 may look just like 2018. Another 3,000+ allegations, another few hundred substantiated, another generation of survivors silenced. But if we act, if lawmakers, administrators, advocates, families, and communities demand accountability, then the story can change. The numbers can fall. The scars can heal. The system can transform. This is where we leave the numbers behind. Because ultimately, this is not a story about statistics. It is a story about survival, about children who endured what they should never have faced, about families who fought for justice, about advocates who refused to be silenced. The final lesson is simple, but urgent. The system is not broken. It is working as designed. To protect youth, we must redesign it. And so, the story does not end here. It continues in courtrooms, in state legislatures, in advocacy groups, in family homes, and it continues with you. If you've stayed with us through this journey, you are part of the movement for accountability. Awareness is power. Sharing is resistance. Demanding change is survival. This is Global Crime Stories. If you believe these youth deserve protection, if you believe silence is not an option, subscribe, share this video, and join us in shining light into the darkest corners of justice. Because in the end, the numbers may count incidents, but what matters most is that every child counts,